Good evening, students. Today we will be talking about understanding different economic systems, communism, socialism, and capitalism. Please create Cornell notes in your composition book, set them up in a Cornell notes fashion, and use each of the main headings as a question in order to help guide your notes. Please write down any questions that you have in the left-hand column of your notes so they can be discussed tomorrow in class. And thank you, and look forward to hearing your questions tomorrow. So our essential question for our notes today is, what role should a government play in the economy? So please use this essential question to help guide your note-taking and make sure that you're ready to address it at the end in your summary. So the first thing that we have to do is define what an economy is. And essentially an economy is all of the money, goods, and services that a government takes in. Now, economies vary when it comes to how the government is involved. The relationship between a government and the economy has been debated since America's historical beginnings and much, much earlier than that. Today we're going to look at three of the most popular ideas of how to run an economy. So we will start today by understanding what economics is as a study. So economics is a social science that analyzes the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. Many different economic systems in the world. These help formulate our understanding of modern world history, and it is important to understand that very few, if any of these, can be pure in reality as they are described in academia. In essence, is that you could come up with a good idea, but when the rubber meets the road, that you always have to adapt, change, and overcome. So this is a graphic of world economies. The darker purple, maroon colors are the wealthiest countries, where the lighter blue or aquamarine colors are the poorer countries in the world. Now, if you note, the wealthiest country in the world does happen to be the United States, but wealthiest country per capita happens to be Norway, where many of the poorest countries are in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. So the first system that we'll talk about today is capitalism. Capitalism is an economic system in which the factors, equipment, and other means of production are privately owned, rather than controlled by the government. The best example of this is the United States, where most of our industry is owned by private individuals, such as Coca-Cola, General Motors, Coke Industries, Walmart, etc. These allow for the businesses to do what they feel is best with very little government intervention. Capitalism is seen as having extremely highs and lows as it comes to the cost and benefit of capitalism. The biggest cost is oftentimes people are willing to see others suffer so they can make money. Think Apple paying its workers in China 33 cents an hour so you can buy a $1,000 iPhone from them. The positives is that it is free enterprise and that people work as hard as they can and they will be able to hopefully make money and rise out of poverty. Capitalism is defined by something called laissez-faire, which means hands off or the empty hand. The idea that the free market, through supply and demand, will regulate itself if government does not interfere. Government should be hands off with big business. This is the highest form of capitalism, and this was the capitalism that we saw during the Industrial Revolution, where in essence they were willing to work people half to death if this meant that they were going to make buckets of money. Now, you might say that is unethical, but the idea that hands off means that people will tell the market what they want. If they don't like child labor, they will not buy from companies that use child labor. However, what we have really seen throughout history is that people will buy what is cheapest. Case in point, Walmart is one of the most successful businesses in the United States. Capitalism works on what we would refer to as a supply and demand curve. Essentially what this means is that the more demand there is for something and the less supply there is of something, the more expensive something will be. Think designer purses, designer shoes, designer handbags. They don't make a lot of them because they're made by hand, but the demand for them is very high, and so the price for them is very high. But as the supply of something goes up, generally speaking, the demand for it decreases. Think about apples. There's always a large supply of apples. There's not necessarily a huge demand for apples, and so therefore you can always get apples at about 60 cents per pound because of the fact that they are plentiful and that people are not jumping over each other to get these things. So let's think about how does this work in real life. Think about something that costs a lot of money because a lot of people like it. One of the best examples of this is actually the Michael Jordan tennis shoe, whichever one you like. For each release, Nike only releases very few, and this allows the prices of those particular shoes to stay at a high level. Now, the second concept that we'll discuss is often seen as a bad word here in the United States, and that is socialism. Socialism is a political and economic theory that advocates ownership of the means of production. What this means is essentially that the people as a whole or as a collective own the land, labor, and capital, such as factories and farms, rather than wealthy landowners or capitalists. The power belongs to the working people rather than giving that power to the very, very wealthy. Examples are China, Yugoslavia, or older Yugoslavia, and parts of Europe. So now, many of the parts of Europe are actually quite successful socialist countries. These include Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland. Many of these places are some of the happiest countries in the entire world, and they have very high quality of life. And this is because they pay extremely high taxes, upwards of 40 to 50%, but then the government takes care of most everything. And now Norway is wealthy because they have vast amounts of oil and gas reserves as well. So now the biggest enemy of the capitalist world is not quite socialism, it is actually communism. A communist is an economics or political system in which the state or the community owns all property and the means of production, and all citizens share wealth. There is very little private property where the government basically provides for your living expenses, provides for your food, etc. However, there are major drawbacks to communism. Number one, it essentially becomes what we would call a classless society, theoretically. However, but what we actually see is that some people become more equal than others. And generally speaking, Vietnam, Cuba, the USSR, North Korea, these countries have all been dominated by hardcore dictators who are willing to basically murder their way to power and murder their way to keeping power. Unlike socialism, which provides for free enterprise, communism essentially says the government is going to control every aspect of your life. Many of these countries, like the USSR, employed extensive police networks that were willing to basically weed out any dissidents or people that broke from the communist ranks, and those people would be murdered. These are generally, there's been no real pure communist state. There's only been these quasi-communist states with these hardcore dictators at the top. So to give us a nice overview of these three ideas, so first off, capitalism is what we would refer to as a market economy. Ownership is controlled by individuals, and what people want is, or what we would call a market, determines that the goods that will be bought and sold and at what prices. Competition feasibly keeps the prices low and the quality high, and these allow for a very high standard of living and economic security. Individuals are free to earn profits, but you do have a lot of risk. Socialism, on the other hand, is where the basic production is owned and managed by the government. Private ownership with the regulation of businesses is permitted. However, the government does have his hand in it, things. Cooperation is stressed over competition. Everybody do the right thing. Everybody make the right thing. There's an incredibly high standard of living and economic security. However, you do pay in taxes. However, the thing about it is your taxes generally go to things such as free healthcare and education. Now, communism, on the other hand, is what we would call a command economy, where the government owns all of the factors of production, and the government determines what goods will be sold and at what prices. There's no competition because the government owns everything, and generally the quality is terrible. The goal is equality, but it is usually equality that is enforced by the government, and thus it eliminates freedom of choice. So for your summary, please tell us what you think the best ism is in your opinion, and to please explain why.